In Kyiv, the rhythm of war has become part of daily life. Sirens, checkpoints, the distant sound of defensive systems activating above the city. These are not unusual events anymore. They are part of the background of a country that has spent years defending itself against Russia's full-scale invasion. But recently, something else has begun to weigh on the minds of Ukraine's leaders. Not the sound of missiles, not the movement of Russian forces, but the possibility that the world's attention and its resources might begin shifting somewhere else. President Volodymyr Zelensky raised that concern in remarks given to the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. He spoke about the widening conflict in the Middle East and what it might mean for Ukraine, specifically for the weapons Ukraine depends on to defend its skies. Air defense systems have been a central element of Ukraine's ability to protect its cities from Russian missile and drone attacks. They intercept incoming threats before they reach civilian areas, and the missiles used by those systems are not unlimited. In the interview, Zelensky explained the risk in clear terms. We could find ourselves having difficulty obtaining missiles and weapons to defend our skies. Those words reflect a concern that the global supply of air defense interceptors may become stretched if multiple conflicts require the same systems at the same time. The systems he referenced include Patriot missiles. These are among the most advanced air defense interceptors currently in operation. They are used by the United States and its allies to defend against missile attacks. Ukraine has relied on them to help protect major cities and critical infrastructure. But the Patriot system, like many advanced defense technologies, requires a steady supply of interceptor missiles, and those missiles are produced in limited quantities. The conflict in the Middle East has already involved the use of air defense systems by several countries in the region. Zelensky acknowledged that reality when speaking about the situation. The Americans and their allies in the Middle East might need them to defend themselves, he said. For example, Patriot missiles. The implication is clear. If those systems are being used heavily in another conflict zone, the demand for interceptor missiles increases. And when demand rises globally, supply can tighten. For Ukraine, that creates uncertainty because the country's air defense network has been built with assistance from partners in the United States and Europe. Those partners have supplied equipment, training, and the interceptor missiles required to keep those systems functioning. Without those interceptors, the systems themselves cannot operate effectively. This concern about supply is not simply theoretical. Air defense interceptors are highly complex pieces of military technology. Their production involves specialized components, manufacturing facilities, and time. They cannot be produced overnight. Zelensky also raised another concern connected to the Middle East conflict: attention. Wars demand focus from governments, from diplomats, from military planners. And when a new crisis erupts, the attention of the international community can shift quickly. During the interview, Zelensky was asked whether there was a risk that the United States and the European Union could become distracted by events in the Middle East. His response was direct. Of course, it's a risk. That sentence reflects a reality that leaders in Kyiv understand very well. For several years now, Ukraine has been at the center of international attention because of Russia's invasion. Diplomatic visits, military aid packages, international meetings, much of that activity has focused on supporting Ukraine's defense. Only recently, the country marked a major moment. The 4th anniversary of the day Russia launched its full-scale war. Western leaders traveled to Kyiv to mark that date. The streets of the capital filled with visiting delegations. Security convoys moved through the city. Diplomatic meetings took place behind closed doors. For a brief moment, the focus of the world again centered on Ukraine. But that focus can shift quickly. Just days later, another conflict was dominating headlines and diplomatic conversations: the Middle East. In Kyiv, that shift has not gone unnoticed. People living in the Ukrainian capital have become highly aware of how international attention moves. One moment the cameras are here, the next moment they are somewhere else. Some residents have pointed to how people in the Gulf region reacted to drone strikes, events that might cause alarm in one place but have become almost routine in a city like Kyiv. In Ukraine, air defense alerts and drone threats have become familiar, but the deeper concern is not simply how people react to attacks. It is how the global response to conflict can influence the flow of military support. And that brings the conversation back to Zelensky's warning. He described the possibility that Ukraine could face challenges obtaining the interceptor missiles needed to maintain its air defense network. Those systems protect cities, they protect energy infrastructure, they protect civilians. And if the supply of interceptors becomes strained because multiple conflicts require them, Ukraine could find itself competing for the same resources. At the same time, Zelensky expressed hope that the situation in the Middle East would remain limited. He spoke about the potential consequences if it expanded into a prolonged war. I hope the Iranian crisis remains a limited operation and doesn't turn into a long war. He added a reminder rooted in Ukraine's own experience. We know firsthand how bloody it risks being. Those words come from a leader whose country has been living through years of war. A war that has shaped every part of daily life. And now, as another region faces conflict, Ukraine is watching closely, watching not only the military developments abroad, but also the global consequences that could ripple outward. Because for Ukraine, defending the sky above its cities is not an abstract challenge. It is a daily requirement. And the tools that make that defense possible must keep coming. As one Ukrainian official in Kyiv quietly reflected on the moment, the sentiment carried the weight of the situation. Sometimes, he said softly, the hardest part of a war is making sure the world remembers it is still happening. In Kyiv, the sense of global attention has always been visible, not only in speeches or headlines, but in physical presence. Motorcades moving through guarded streets, delegations stepping from black vehicles, foreign leaders walking through the capital alongside Ukrainian officials. For years, Ukraine has lived under the constant gaze of the international community. Diplomatic visits have become a familiar sight in the city. Leaders from across Europe and beyond have arrived to stand beside Ukraine as it continues defending itself against Russia's full-scale invasion. And recently, the capital experienced one of the most symbolic gatherings since the war began, the 4th anniversary of the invasion. That date carries deep meaning in Ukraine. It marks the moment when Russia expanded its aggression into a full-scale war, launching attacks across the country. Last week, that anniversary brought Western leaders into Kyiv. The streets were filled with security convoys and diplomatic delegations. Meetings took place behind closed doors. Speeches were delivered. Messages of support were repeated. For many Ukrainians, those visits were a reminder that their country's fight had not been forgotten, that the international community was still paying attention, still engaged, still focused. But the rhythm of global attention can change quickly. Only days after those anniversary events, another conflict began dominating international discussion. The Middle East. Diplomatic channels shifted. Military analysts began examining developments there. Governments around the world turned their focus toward the rapidly evolving situation. In Kyiv, that change has been noticeable. Residents of the capital have become highly sensitive to the direction of global attention. They have lived through years in which international headlines often centered on their country, and they understand how easily that focus can move elsewhere. The contrast between conflicts can sometimes appear in small, everyday observations. Some people in Kyiv have noted how residents in Gulf countries reacted to recent drone strikes in their region. Those reactions have drawn comparisons here in Ukraine, because in Kyiv, the sound of drones has become a regular part of life. Air raid alerts are not unusual. The presence of defensive systems in the sky above the city is something people have grown accustomed to. What might provoke shock in another place can feel routine in a city that has lived under constant threat. But the deeper concern in Kyiv is not how people react to the attacks themselves. It is what those attacks might mean for Ukraine's ability to continue defending itself. President Zelensky's remarks to the Italian newspaper reflected that concern clearly. He spoke openly about the risk that Ukraine's war with Russia could begin to fade from the center of international attention. The question put to him during the interview addressed that very issue. Could Ukraine's defense be overlooked if governments and media turn their focus toward the Middle East? His answer was brief. Of course, it's a risk. Those words reveal the calculation taking place in Kyiv. Wars require resources. They require diplomacy. They require attention. When multiple conflicts unfold at the same time, governments must divide their focus. Military planners must consider several regions simultaneously, and the resources required to sustain defensive systems are not infinite. Zelensky's comments also touched on the uncertainty surrounding diplomatic developments. There is already doubt about whether certain planned discussions involving the United States and Russia will move forward. Diplomatic processes during wartime often shift quickly. Meetings are scheduled, then delayed, then reconsidered. Those changes can create additional uncertainty for countries directly involved in the conflict. In Ukraine, that uncertainty is closely connected to the broader international environment because support from allies has played a critical role in helping the country defend itself. Military assistance, economic support, political backing, all of these elements have formed the foundation of Ukraine's ability to continue resisting Russia's invasion, and those elements are influenced by global events. If another conflict expands or intensifies, governments must decide how to allocate their attention and resources. Zelensky's remarks about air defense missiles illustrate how that calculation could affect Ukraine directly. The interceptor missiles used by air defense systems are already being deployed in the Middle East. Several countries in that region rely on similar defensive technologies. If those systems are activated frequently during ongoing fighting, the demand for interceptor missiles will increase. And when demand increases across multiple regions, supply can tighten. That possibility is one of the reasons Zelensky described the situation as uncertain. He understands that the same defensive systems used to protect cities in Ukraine are also used by other nations facing threats. And when those systems are needed in more than one conflict at the same time, the competition for resources becomes more complicated. Inside Ukraine, this realization has produced a mixture of concern and determination. People in Kyiv understand that the global spotlight does not remain fixed in one place forever. History has shown that international attention moves, new crises appear, other events capture the focus of governments and media, but the war in Ukraine continues regardless of where headlines are written. Missile alerts still sound across cities, air defense systems still activate when threats approach, and the need for interceptor missiles remains constant. The conversations taking place in Kyiv now reflect that awareness. Officials are watching the developments in the Middle East carefully, not only because of the geopolitical implications, but because of the practical consequences that could follow. Every missile fired by an air defense system somewhere else in the world represents another demand placed on the global supply, and those supplies matter deeply for a country defending itself against Russia's ongoing attacks. In quiet conversations across the capital, people speak about the challenge of maintaining international attention during a prolonged war, because wars that last years inevitably become part of the background of global news. Even when the fighting itself continues, one Ukrainian analyst in Kyiv described the situation with a sentence that captures the tension. "The danger is not that the war stops," he said softly. "The danger is that people stop looking." That sentence carries the weight of Ukraine's current moment, a country still fighting, still defending its cities, still relying on the support of partners around the world, and now watching closely as another region of the world becomes the center of global attention. Because in war, attention is not only about headlines, it is also about resources. And the resources needed to defend Ukraine's skies remain vital every single day. In Ukraine, protecting the sky has become one of the most urgent responsibilities of the war. Air defense systems operate across the country, scanning constantly for incoming threats. Russian missiles and drones have repeatedly targeted cities, energy infrastructure, and civilian areas since the full-scale invasion began. Each time those threats appear, air defense systems activate, and each activation requires interceptor missiles. These interceptors are not simple equipment. They are highly specialized weapons designed to track and destroy incoming missiles before they reach their targets. Among the most advanced of these systems are Patriot interceptors. Ukraine has relied on such systems to defend key locations. They form part of a network designed to intercept threats before they reach populated areas. But interceptor missiles are not limitless. They are produced through complex manufacturing processes that require time, specialized facilities, and carefully managed supply chains. President Volodymyr Zelensky highlighted this reality during his remarks to the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. He spoke about the growing pressure on global supplies of air defense interceptors. The reason is straightforward. When multiple conflicts occur at the same time, the demand for these missiles rises sharply. Countries facing aerial threats must activate their defensive systems. Each activation requires interceptor missiles, and those interceptors must be replaced. Zelensky explained that the fighting in the Middle East could contribute to this situation. Air defense systems in that region are already being used to intercept incoming threats. The more frequently those systems are activated, the more interceptor missiles are required, and many of those systems use the same type of interceptors. Patriot missiles are one example. They are deployed by the United States and several allied nations. Ukraine has also received these systems to help defend against Russian missile strikes. But the missiles themselves are produced in limited numbers. When several countries rely on the same equipment during different conflicts, the pressure on supply increases. Zelensky addressed that concern directly. The Americans and their allies in the Middle East might need them to defend themselves, for example, Patriot missiles. That statement reflects a practical calculation. If interceptor missiles are being used heavily in one region, it could affect how many are available elsewhere. For Ukraine, the implications are serious. Air defense systems are not optional equipment. They are essential tools for protecting cities. They intercept incoming threats before they reach homes, hospitals, and infrastructure. Without interceptor missiles, those systems cannot operate effectively. The issue Zelensky described is therefore not only about military logistics, it is also about civilian safety. Across Ukraine, air raid alerts still sound regularly. When those alerts occur, people move toward shelters. Defensive systems activate, operators track incoming threats across radar screens, and interceptor missiles are launched to stop them. Each successful interception protects lives on the ground. Each interception also uses one missile from a limited supply. This is why Ukraine watches global developments carefully. The conflict in the Middle East has introduced another region where air defense systems may be used frequently. If that conflict remains limited, the effect on global missile supplies may be manageable. But if it expands or continues for a long period, demand could rise significantly. Zelensky expressed hope that the situation would not escalate further. I hope the Iranian crisis remains a limited operation and doesn't turn into a long war. His words reflect Ukraine's own experience with prolonged conflict. Russia's invasion has already lasted years. The scale of the fighting has demonstrated how long wars can stretch resources and reshape global priorities. Ukraine understands that reality firsthand, and that experience informs how its leaders view other conflicts. Zelensky added another reflection during the interview. We know firsthand how bloody it risks being. That sentence carries the weight of a country that has lived through years of missile strikes, drone attacks, and battlefield fighting. It also explains why Ukraine is closely watching the developments beyond its borders, because global conflicts are not isolated events. They interact, they influence supply chains, they affect diplomatic attention. And they shape the availability of critical equipment. For Ukraine, the challenge now is maintaining the air defense network that protects its cities. Those systems remain active every day. Operators monitor the skies continuously. Missiles are launched when threats appear. And the need for interceptor supplies continues without pause. In Kyiv, people understand that the war with Russia has not ended. The sirens still sound, the defensive systems still operate, and the country continues to depend on the support of international partners. That support includes not only political backing, but also the equipment required to defend against aerial attacks. As global events unfold, Ukraine is watching carefully, watching how governments respond, watching how resources are allocated, and watching whether the supply of air defense interceptors remains strong enough to keep the country's defensive shield intact. Because the skies above Ukraine remain contested, and the systems protecting those skies must remain ready. In quiet conversations across Kyiv, the importance of those defenses is often expressed in simple terms. One Ukrainian official described it in a short line that resonates deeply in a city that has lived under the threat of missiles. The sky above us, he said quietly, is where survival begins.